On October 1st, 2017, millions of Spaniards took to the streets and went to the polls to ostensibly answer the question as to whether or not they would still be Spaniards. Spaniards that I'm referencing are residents of Catalonia, and the vote that I'm referring to is the Catalonian independence referendum. And as you guys could probably guess from all the news coverage around this, it's kind of a big deal. Roughly 42% of the residents of Catalonia went to the polls, and over 90% of them declared that they want to be independent from the Spanish central state. The day of the vote itself was mired by violence as the Spanish national government deployed police in order to stop the vote by force. Roughly 1,000 individuals were injured by the police, leading to mass protests, demonstrations, and international condemnation. Yet, despite their best efforts, the Catalonian vote still took place, and arguably, the independence movement still won. At least this is what a number of pro-independence actors are arguing, but I want to make a slightly different case. It's not that the independence movement won despite the efforts of the Spanish national government. The independence movement managed to win 90% of the vote because of the actions of the Spanish national government. For those of you who don't know, Catalonia is one of 17 semi-autonomous regions in Spain. A little over 300 years ago, it was actually its own nation, but was conquered and then incorporated into the rest of the nation during the War of Spanish Succession. This is something that many Catalonians have never actually gotten over, however. Indeed, there's a really unique kind of quasi-nationalistic pride encircling the regional identity there, and it's bolstered by the fact that Catalonia has its own unique culture and even its own language that's distinct from Spanish. It's called Catalan. Indeed, when you're traveling throughout the region, it can genuinely feel that you're in an entirely separate country. On top of that, the region is actually rather prosperous and sends a lot of money to the national government. Indeed, it actually sends more money to the national government than it gets back in return. So for this and a whole host of other reasons, the Catalonian regional government decided to create a independence referendum to answer the question as to whether or not they would secede from Spain. An analogy would be if Texas decided that it was tired of footing the bill for other less prosperous states and tried to split. Except, if it had its own really distinct culture and language, which actually, if this was a couple of hundred years ago... Anyways, I digress. As I hinted a little bit earlier, the vote itself got really messy. In the days leading up to the referendum, the Spanish national government declared that due to the wording of the Constitution, it would not recognize the referendum as an action that can be legally taken. The Catalonian government determined that they were going to have the vote anyways, to which the Spanish national government promised that should they try, they would do their damnedest to shut it down. As I mentioned earlier, they kept their word, for better or worse. And when the dust was cleared, independence won with 90% of the vote, with only about 42% of the eligible voters coming out to vote. Now, that may not sound too bad to American ears, considering that our municipal elections have like 15 to 20% turnout, and our congressional elections will often have around 40% turnout. But you have to keep in mind that Spain actually is really good at turning out to vote, right? You often see things like 75 to 80% turnout on the national level. And when you have issues as pressing as independence, it's rather surprising that the vote would be this low. Until, of course, you consider the fact that the police were out, but we're going to get to that in a second. I don't know anywhere near enough about Catalonian culture or the wording of the Spanish National Constitution to make arguments kind of circling around those points, but I do know a thing or two about participatory actions, especially voter participation, and I think there's something really interesting to be said in that regard. Now, it's pretty obvious that the police response is the reason why voter turnout was so low, but what's less obvious is the fact that that same response is the reason why independents managed to actually win at the polls by such a huge margin. To understand this, imagine that these two bars represent the likelihood that people would turn out during the Catalonian independence referendum. This bar represents the individuals who would want to remain with Spain, and this bar represents those who would want to secede. Theories of voting hold that people are more likely to turn out if they feel that an outcome is close, if it's uncertain, if it's important, and if not participating would cause them more regret than if they were to turn out. Provided, however, that the costs of participating are not too high. Because this was such an important issue, and again because Spain does a much better job at generating turnout than us, we would normally expect a lot of people to turn out in this kind of election. But when the government said that the results weren't going to matter, it slightly depressed the number of people who were going to vote. When it was clear that a sizable chunk of people were going to vote anyways, that's when they brought in the police, and that's when the numbers really shot down. Except they especially shot down for those who would have voted to remain compared to those who wanted to vote to secede. It sounds counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you realize that those who wanted to remain would have been discouraged from turning out for two reasons. First is the fact that they didn't want to go out and get beaten up just for supporting the same thing as the people doing the beating. Why go out and support the status quo if doing so would get you injured when you could also be effectively supporting the status quo by just staying at home and playing video games? The second one is the fact that one of the main reasons that these guys are turning out is to assert their will over these guys and prevent them from winning. The police are now providing a significant deterrent to the secessionists, a greater one than those who wanted to remain could ever legally do. They have the force of legal violence. So unless they feel unusually passionate, they were better off at home playing video games. Honestly, playing video games is probably just a smarter option more times than not, regardless of the question. The secessionists definitely have an aversion to getting beaten up too, which is why their turnout also went down pretty substantially, but they were motivated to change something, not to try to keep something the same in response to the threat of change. When the police started taking to the street, it shifted the logic of action for those who wanted to secede from being that of a vote to being that of a protest. This energized individuals who wanted to go out and change something and encourage those who like things the way they were to stay home. This shifted the composition of the electorate to exclude moderates and instead have more activists, protesters, and individuals who felt that the common good would be augmented by seceding from Spain, and it wasn't by a minuscule number either. Remember, this vote went 9-1. What makes this even worse is that the secessionist vote probably would have failed if Spain had just let it go to the polls unencumbered. There weren't a lot of public opinion polls leading up to the independence referendum, but as this article by the Monkey Cage argues, there has never been a time in recent history where Catalonia independence has polled at over 50%, and the most recent vote that happened about 2 months prior showed them losing by about 10 percentage points. Because so many people vote there, they don't have anywhere near as many problems with likely voter models as we have here in the United States. So when you see a 10-point margin happening in the polls leading up to an election, you can be fairly sure that that is going to be about what happens. Secession was probably going to lose. However, if there's one thing everyone did agree on, it's that the vote should happen. You have to remember, about 30-35 years ago, Spain was still under a military dictatorship. It only became a democracy fairly recently. As such, the citizens really value the elements of democracy, and voting is, it's kind of a big one. They had said something like, "We will not recognize the vote as a binding resolution, but we respect our citizens' freedom to peacefully assemble and will use the tallies as an opportunity to start a dialogue," they probably would have had the outcome they wanted. But instead they opted to crack down, to use them out of their police, and to fan the flames of secession. And you can bet that it played a critical role in making the decision for the Catalonian regional government to, ratify the vote a whole heck of a lot easier. So congratulations, Spanish national government. In trying to secure your most preferred option, you actually caused your least preferred one to come to fruition. In short, you played yourself. What do you guys think? How responsible is the Spanish national government for securing this outcome that they probably would have liked to avoid? Should the referendum have even happened, and if so, do you think that it would have won, or that it would have lost, or would have been close? Let me know what you guys think for this, or any other thoughts you might have had popping up during the video down in the comment section below. I look forward to reading all of them and answering as many as I can in the next comment response video. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel, you can do so by commenting down below, by sharing this video, and by subscribing to the channel to stay in the loop for more awesome social science content is uploaded. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.